Swaikab, and welcome back to this comparison video between SLR style and rangefinder style. And this will just be a personal opinion, of course, of my experiences. There will be a few other video links in the descriptions of much better people who want to try to objectify the differences, which is perfectly fine and great and recommended, by the way. But this would just be my personal sort of experiences trying out rangefinder for the first time, and there has always been points that I keep hearing with the comparisons that one feels better than the other, and that maybe has to do with the idea of the Leica brand being quite powerful in this sense of its rangefinder style, that one should or must. The pressure is there, even though things might have changed over the years, that now it's more around the lines of use whatever you want and everything is fine. But in the past, definitely rangefinder style has been sort of the preferred option to get if one wants to be sort of taken more seriously, at least in the online space, that is. So some of the pointers that I keep hearing with the comparison did not make sense, and I wanted sort of to see for myself, and others sort of sound too good to be true, and wanted to see again how does it actually feel, and maybe one style does fit me over the other. And surprisingly, one of the first things is the idea of focusing was faster or better, which in this case I must wholeheartedly at this current stage disagree with my experience. And I went out with these two cameras at the same time, trying to take photos and just sort of get a feel. Now obviously it might be a little bit biased that I've been using the SLR longer and sort of more used to it, but then again I kind of was sort of shooting it in zone focus for some of the time, and so it's more of like seeing like, do I feel a difference with the rangefinder style that makes me feel like I'm going faster, or is it easier? And I had another clip that sort of will quickly explain how these two focusing mechanisms work. So here I want to just illustrate like the difference between the SLR and the rangefinder style focusing. And so here would be the SLR, where it will be a much larger circle. So it will move up and down like so. Only one side will move up and down. And so in a very high contrast, high texture scene, when the lines line up, you will see that it will be, or you will know it is in focus. So you have a much larger area to also check as well and see that you focus in, and then it becomes in focus. Whilst a problem might be sometimes the texture would be vertical or opposite, and sometimes it would happen when trying to shoot vertical shots in sort of my experience, where the texture and the lines are vertical and moving in parallel to the focusing tab, and so it's quite more difficult to see where it lines up because it's again not in the horizontal aspect. Now when using the Olympus camera, which is rangefinder, basically you have sort of two squares, and then one square moves over, and then when they actually line up on top of each other to become one, you will know that it will be fairly in focus. And I've still sort of experienced sort of this, where the two lines go up and down and I couldn't see whether it's in focus or not. The same thing happened when I used the rangefinder camera in this scene, and I had to sort of change it up to horizontal again to be able to see that, oh, I see this sort of line, and then I connect it to the other line and then take the photo. Another thing that I want to sort of illustrate is also how people claim that rangefinder is sort of faster to focus or is clearer, when the SLR style, you get a giant circle to see the contrast and see the focusing tab or whatever it's called, and to sort of look and focus. Here the square is quite small, And when I hand over the camera, in this case to my sister to check out, she couldn't even tell where the square is and how to focus the camera in the first place. In this case, want to just illustrate that it's not better or worse, it's just there's a higher skill floor when it comes to the rangefinder style. But even with the higher skill floor, I cannot imagine that there's a higher skill ceiling as well, where you would benefit much more from the rangefinder style than the SLR when it comes to manually focusing. It's something that I have not really understood or experienced just yet. Once again, it's very much a center focus kind of thing, where you will have to focus the center and then maybe you recompose and change like the composition a little bit, knowing that you have already focused. While the SLR, and I will check again just to be sure, that I feel like there's many moments where I might be focusing here, but then in the entire sort of frame of the camera, I can still see the sharpness change on either side. And so my main subject might be somewhere here because of the general composition. I can still see this person come into focus, and then I take the shot and the person is in focus, even though the focusing tab is directly in the middle. While the rangefinder style, when you're focusing here, you're only seeing what's here. So even if I want this person to be on this side of the rule of thirds, let's say, I'll have to like move the person, that center of frame, focus, and then move it back to how I want to compose. So that's sort of where it doesn't make sense to me at this moment in time, how it's faster or it's better, just different. So with that, it sort of does go to show that when you look through here, even though there's a square patch, and it certainly sometimes in certain situations when I was out shooting did feel a little bit easier to shoot, but a few other times it was definitely much harder, especially when you try to focus on the main subject and then you have to recompose. Whilst I had to double check again, and this was just in my room and outside a little bit when there was no film, that I could clearly sort of try to manual focus certain objects without having the subject being dead center, and then I could just sort of visually see on the edges of the frame that, oh, it's sharp now, then, and I'm already composed the picture as I wanted to, and then I take the shot. While here it will be most likely impossible unless you again practice your distancing that these photographers will talk about, that you must know the distance and then measure it on your own. So it's now less about using the rangefinder to focus, but now being a little bit more experienced to sort of manual focus. The next thing that people don't really talk about is when trying to shoot vertically, and so I would go vertical like this, and then my hand here would then start to block because it will have to change. Now I don't know if I should do it this way, and then I would use my left eye to look through here and then learn it that way, and so my fingers would then not be in the way. But if I went this way, my hands would certainly be blocking and I'll have to like turn. So like the hand position definitely is uncomfortable when using a rangefinder style, and will need a lot of adjustment just to be able to use it properly when it comes to trying to shoot vertically. Here, of course, you can just put your hand wherever because it's the SLR style. And the next point that I would want to talk about is the idea, and that Matt Day talked about, which is to frame the subject, and you wouldn't have to chimp with the notion of having a faster aperture, because with most SLR styles, and the benefit of it, and sometimes it could make a photographer lazy, as some might say, is that when trying to focus it will be wide open at 2.8, even though you try to step down because you may be using Sunny 16 and the sun is just too bright. The default of the lens will still be at f2.8, maybe you could see here. And then with the benefit of the Olympus style, you can press this button here to then close the aperture to actually see the depth of field. But when trying to shoot fast, especially with street photography, I don't think this is the kind of luxury or time that you will have. So even when trying to focus, you're not actually focusing at f8 seeing like the full depth of field. You're still seeing it at 2.8. And then sometimes I do sort of maybe think too hard of trying to get it perfectly in focus, forgetting that it's at f8. So even though the lines inside are not perfectly straight, because the depth of field, especially on this 28mm, is quite wide, I will most likely have the subject sharp, and then I should just take a photo before I lose the composition. So a small interest that will bring me back to try to use the rangefinder more is that reason in particular, to sort of compose the image and scene without relying on the depth of field benefit that the SLR style may provide. And the sort of last thing is less about rangefinders and more to do with this camera in particular. So it's a safety feature, and let's go with the positive, is that when the cover is closed, and this is basically a program mode camera, so it sets the aperture and shutter speed for you automatically. All you have to do is, well, hopefully you set the ISO correctly inside here, and to do that you basically set the focus tab all the way to the minimum, and then there will be a new tab that appears here that you can start to turn. And then when you start to turn, you'll be able to see this spot over here can start to turn, and then you set your ISO that way. But in any case, it will set the aperture and shutter speed for you, and because of that, when it closes, the sensor is inside. I believe this is the sensor light meter, and so when it's closed, it's basically too dark, and so you won't be able to take a photo. Only when it's open again, and then it just took a shot, and you can go again and took a shot. So a problem that I have in the street photography that I was trying to test, and I'll show you some clips, is that I tried to take a shots of some scenes, and I was still sort of limit testing, and obviously some scenes were too dark, so I understand it wouldn't shoot because its brightest ability is at 1/30th of a second at f1.7, and the brightest scene that it will shoot at, and there's no limit to how bright it is, but basically its limit is at 500th of a second, and I believe it is at f16. So the shutter speed will increase at the same time as the aperture will increase as well. So if it's very bright, you won't get 500th of a second at f1.7. So in any regular day, if you want a regular shutter speed, it will always be at 60 of a second f4, or 1/25th of a second at f8, and then maximum 500 of a second at f16. So only during sort of low light and before it gets nighttime, where things may go down to 30th of a second at f2.8, f2, and then maximum again, correction, it will be a slower speed of 1/15th of a second at f1.7. And if the scene or the camera thinks it's too dark, it would just not take a photo, which I was not able to take multiple photos. But this is a problem or limitation of this camera in particular, and so this will be definitely a daytime camera for me. And if I want to shoot nighttime, it will still be this SLR camera. Again, it's more comparing the camera models than the rangefinder style at this point, but it's an important distinction that I wanted to mention, because obviously I'm not going to go out and just buy another rangefinder camera. It's just unrealistic. With that said, I would still have a 50 f1.8 if I want to use for low light even more, if I'm like planning to do so as well. and this camera would of course go down to a full second if need to, and it may still work out with the image results, or we might get like a certain blur image that may still work. At least you get the shot and could see the results, compared to this camera that will never take the shot and you will never know what it might look like. So on the one hand, just to refresh, because it has a cover and it's too dark, it's a safety mechanism so that you don't accidentally take a shot. But it has its downsides, where if the scene is too dark, then it would not take a shot and you would miss the moment. And that is sort of my personal conclusion with the differences with rangefinder and SLR style. And just to reiterate, I wanted to sort of see some more when it comes to trying to compose with the rangefinder and not rely on the depth of field, in which case with this camera in particular it might not work as well, because in any fast paced shooting it will most likely be at f4 or smaller, so I'm not gonna get a lot of depth of field in this camera in the first place, and so it might not be a useful practice per se, and I'll most likely benefit using the SLR style. Now, one last thing about the sort of comparison is that I think it's mainly to do with the lack and of the mirror at the back over here. So if I just quickly remove this portion, we see that there is a mirror inside, and that sort of just allows the rangefinder camera to just be more compact than the SLR style, which to me is sort of the biggest benefit of the two when I look at it and compare the two. Again, it's just how I would use it and how I see the benefits of the two systems. And lastly, with that said, because of the mirror and lack of mirror, the focusing tab over here is less important to me. And so there are a bunch of cameras that are, and we're talking about film cameras here, that do have like this rangefinder style but doesn't have the focusing tab. So I think it's like Rolleiflex style cameras that are very small and pocketable. Those have the viewfinder to the side, but you cannot focus it. And this is sort of another question that I have in the general audience, that if the rangefinder allows you to sort of put your head to the side, and so you can sort of have the other half of your face to see the scene, I think that is a bigger design feature of this style over the focusing mechanism, and allows you to sort of work in a different way to be able to sort of see the scene, while this SLR style might be blocking the scene. And this goes back to the more digital style cameras now with Fujifilm or even the Sony 6000 cameras, where they have a rangefinder style position in the EVF or OVF, but it doesn't focus the same way as a rangefinder, and people like to sort of talk down on it, that it's not real. But I feel like the fact that the position is there for your face to be where it is what makes sort of this camera so good compared to the SLR style. But I'll end it there, and hope you all enjoy, and I hope to give you an update soon. See you next time. Bye for now.